Okay, in this next one, we will be discussing Rome as a holy site. I have Stefan here with me.
Hello.
Yeah, so let's just get into the first question. Did Rome feel spiritually alive or more like a museum of faith, and why?
Yeah, I mean, initially coming to Rome and also doing the readings about pilgrimage and what it means to be a pilgrim versus a tourist, I came into, the mindset of, I have to see this as a place that's more than just, the vanity and the beauty that it provides. Of course, Rome itself is a really, really, of course, pretty city, but getting to be there, initially it felt like more like a museum. But then as we, went through different places, and of course the readings and Father Bosco and Father Downing definitely helped with this as well. It helped me sort of understand the spirituality behind each location that we visited. And I think ultimately for me, it became that it was very spiritual, and I felt that, especially like on like even from the first day. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think like a large part of that too of Rome feeling spiritually alive was the community that surrounded us during the pilgrimage. Like people around us, not even in our cohort, but just like the faith that people had that were going on their own spiritual journeys around us definitely made it feel more spiritually alive than a museum. And yeah, of course, Father Bosco and Father Downing really emphasized the meaning, the spiritual meaning behind a lot of the relics that we saw and the tombs and the churches. And so yeah, I think that a lot made it feel spiritually alive.
Yeah, definitely.
The next question is, what made the trip a pilgrimage rather than just religious tourism?
Yeah, for me, the trip ultimately became a pilgrimage because, of course, what we learned about Rome prior to that, and of course, that grounding definitely helped a lot, and sort of that distinction between what makes a tourist versus a pilgrimage or a pilgrim. But I think the biggest thing for me was the community that I was with. It was like a shared understanding that we were going there to be sort of, transformed, whether, from all walks of life. So I think that was the biggest thing. Religious tourism, I think, is a bit of a different sort of like meaning, because I think that if you're religiously touring a place, it's like you're there to access the vanity in it, as opposed to having like a shared understanding with a group of people that are all there for the same purpose. I think it speaks volumes, especially with the Scala Sancta, that we all did it. And that was just like one of those examples, right? So I think that like we went there with a intent to be transformed, individually or and communally as well, as opposed to just like relishing in sort of the vanity and the offers and the joys that Rome brings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a large part of that is being transformed by an experience because I think as a religious tourist, you're like looking at from the outside, looking to collect photos or facts. You're just approaching the place with from an outside perspective and trying to consume as much as you can. But I think a pilgrim is more asking, how can this experience change me intrinsically? So
Yeah, I agree.
and then the next question is, how did visiting places connected to Peter, Paul, or the martyrs shape your understanding of sainthood and the apostles?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, like these saints and martyrs are, you know, stories and people that I read about face value in a textbook, etc. But I think that visiting these places sort of shifted my understanding of that just in a little bit, because obviously the physical presence. But I think that like I think back to one of my like favorite ones, which was the Basilica of Paul, and it felt very very like the architecture there sort of like embellished sort of his like lifestyle, as well. And on top of that, I think one of the most transformative experiences was when Father Downing led an examine outside, and it really allowed me to reflect. And I think that visiting these places and sort of feeling that, like the presence that we read about, really really helped physically. And I think that's what sort of shaped my understanding of them and of sainthood and the apostles. I think that you know um, like they served a purpose in this life, and it was very, very transformative to be physically there.
Yeah, and I also think that visiting places connected to Peter, Paul, and the apostles, the martyrs, I think that made it feel less abstract. It made it feel more concrete. The fact that these were actually people who had real consequences for their beliefs. Looking at portraits, Peter and Paul in churches in DC, or reading about them in a textbook, that just feels very abstract and very not as concrete as it was actually saying how much these saints were venerated. And okay, the next one is, did Rome make Catholicism feel more universal, more institutional, or both?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. For me, I'll tell you, it's both, in my opinion, because I think that individually, it felt more institutional because obviously I am Catholic, but there's something to be said about being there, and then of course that one morning where we saw Pope Leo was actually like insane. That definitely felt like the most institutional, and also I feel like everything that we've learned, going there and sort of, like you said before, it made everything feel less abstract and more concrete. And when I say institutional, I mean more of, like the saints, and sort of like the clergy and like that, like hierarchy as well. It made it seem much more concrete. I will say it also felt more universal in a way because, the community that we were going with, not all of us are Catholic, right? But we all sort of got to experience sort of, a shared understanding with all of the places that we visited. So I'd definitely say that portion felt a little bit more universal as well. And especially, I think, if we're going back to sort of, I guess, like the Baroque Roman, paintings and architecture, it was definitely accessible to everyone, and in some ways excessive. And when I think of excessive, I think of like the St. Peter's Basilica, right? I just felt very, very overwhelming. Um, but I definitely think that physical sort of aspect of Catholicism is much more universal as opposed to like the spiritual. But yeah,
Yeah, and I think when Pope Leo spoke that one day that we were there, the fact that there were so many people from so many different parts of the world that were there to watch him, that made it feel really universal. Of course, we had people in our cohort who, not all of us are American, not all of us are Catholic, so but we all got to experience the same experience, and we all felt, to at least some extent, we all were moved by that experience. And then as far as institutional goes, obviously, like you said, the Pope, the basilicas, they all felt very structured. And, getting able to do Mass in Rome, it was almost exactly the same as it would be in DC or in any other part of the world. So that made it feel very institutional and connected. I think a better word might be connected, just because institutional sometimes has a negative connotation.
yeah,
But yeah, I think the idea that it's institutional is just a reminder of how Catholicism remains unified in a worldwide church.
yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way of framing it.
The last question is, if Rome is a holy site, what exactly makes it holy?
Yeah,
It's kind of a loaded question, but
yeah, I get it. Um, Well, I mean, Rome is holy for many things. Of course, its history, like the people, the saints, the beauty, suffering, and the role in the church. But I don't think it's just exclusive to one of those things. I think, it's a place sort of like where all of them sort of intersect with one another, right? Like when I think about Rome, I think of the history, because, the early memory of the church, the apostles Peter and Paul, and centuries of, Christian worship and persecution. And I think its people make it holy because it's not lived only just within the buildings, but in the people who have faith that have suffered and carried the church forward from there. Um, and then I think that, to go on the beauty point of it, you know, Catholicism and Rome makes it very holy because of the art and architecture that we sort of saw, which like lifts our minds closer, I guess, to God and Catholicism. And its suffering, I think, makes it also holy because I think that the Christian sort of thought and holiness is tied to sort of, persecution and sacrifice. And the continuing role in the church makes it holy also because Rome is, it's not just a museum of faith, but, it remains sort of like this, like, living, I guess, center of Catholic pilgrimage and worship. So I think that the holiness comes from, where all these, aspects intersect. And it's not holy because I think it's not holy, not simply because, sacred things have happened there and we have these basilicas, but because, these memories are preserved and are being interpreted and still, lived to this day wherever around the world.
Yeah, and I think that was a great way of putting it. The history aspect of it, Peter, Paul, and the martyrs, and the witnesses to the martyrs who all existed in Rome. Pilgrims before us had traveled to Rome to venerate the saints, to worship God, and I think it just remains an epicenter of Catholic faith to this day, and the people in Rome are so oriented towards God to the point where it becomes this hotspot of religiosity and faith. So I think that all of those aspects, like you said, were the history, the suffering that had existed in Rome, the beauty of the architecture, the people within Rome, and the people that travel to Rome, and then also the church's continuing role, all meeting in one city makes it a holy city. So yeah, any final thoughts?
No, not really.
All right, thank you for
Yeah,
your time.
thank you.